So this video is based on economic development, and it's going to be an argument and a theory based on obstacles for development, and it's going to be looking at the Harrod-Domar model. So this considers the barriers of low savings and how it impacts the ability to grow the economy. So this is the formula. Now the formula is not too important for A-level economics. It's more to do with what savings rate and capital output ratio means. So I won't worry too much if you are going to use this theory based on that formula of the savings rate divided by the capital output ratio. But you need to know what the savings rate is. So the savings rate just simply means how much of a country's income is saved, because once it's saved, it can then facilitate investment. So if we think about developing countries, unfortunately, they have a very, very low marginal propensity to save. So they have a very, very low savings ratio just simply because they do not have the ability to save. There's high levels of poverty. They struggle to afford basic needs. So for each additional currency of payment they receive, it's likely to be fully spent on trying to access such goods. Now, the capital output ratio, that relates to how efficiently capital turns into output. So the lower the capital output ratio, the more productive the capital is in producing output. The higher the capital output ratio, it suggests that you need higher capital for that output, which means that the capital that they've got is inefficient, is not very good. Developing countries tend to have a high one. Now, lots of reasons why they have a high one. It could be to do with poor infrastructure. It could be to do with the capital that they can afford to purchase. It could be like secondary technology, which maybe it's being well used and therefore it needs constant maintenance. It might be just the compatibility with their energy levels. There's lots of different reasons, but the issue is that they have a low savings rate and a high capital output ratio. So how does savings promote higher economic growth? So savings, they're deposited into commercial banks, and these banks can then facilitate investment via lending. They can also give advice as well in terms of that lending. But firms, they lend to invest, and they invest in capital stock. So if that capital stock has a low capital output ratio, it means that capital, the capital that they're invested in, is going to be very, very efficient at promoting and increasing greater output. Now, if you can produce more output, then obviously that's going to contribute towards the productive potential of the economy. And that means that national output is also going to increase. That national output will turn into national income, and that is going to support GDP growth. And then the cycle continues, because obviously with more income, you can then save it, and that savings then can turn into investment. Now, with obviously lesser economically developed countries, they don't have the savings, and therefore that limits their ability to invest. So a prime example is Nepal. So they're a good example of a developing economy that is struggling to invest. Their gross savings is around 10% of GDP, and their GDP is only about $43.7 billion. So that means their savings is going to be about $4.37 billion. The UK's, however, is just over 16%, which actually is quite low, but their GDP is obviously significantly higher. Their GDP is like roughly $3.2 trillion. So when we look at the difference, we can see that more developed countries, even if they've got, for example, a lower percentage of savings, it's still got a lower percentage and a much bigger level of GDP growth. And then we've got another example of South Korea. Now, South Korea is an interesting one because they've been a real success story for an emergent economy. So the 1950s, very, very low savings, just simply because of the aftermath of the Korean War. 1970s, it was growing, but the 1980s, it grew to 41.8%, which was coinciding with their economic expansion. So a lot of investment, a lot of supply-side policies which were supported from such investment, and the free market incentives as well from Korea. So this percentage, of course, it has fallen since then, but their GDP has also risen. So the amount of savings is still high. I mean, in fact, in 2024, it was still 35.1%, which is significant, and that's going to contribute massively towards investment.